My name is Heather, and I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, I took a choice that I had been preparing for my whole life. I cut ties with my family. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't anything that happened on the spur of the moment. It was the end of years of being ignored, being harsh in small ways, and not saying how disappointed they were. You need to go back 12 years to the time they tried to decide how much I was worth to understand why I did what I did. From the outside, the Evans family from Fairfield, Connecticut, looked ideal. A Mercedes S-Class parked properly in the driveway, a country club membership that promised exclusivity and power, and a 6-bedroom colonial on 2 acres. Richard Ivans, my father, was the CEO of a medium-sized logistics company. My mother died of cancer when I was 8. It was fast and ruthless, and it left a hole that no one could ever fill. Her hands were softer and warmer than her face, and they always reached for mine. They taught me a world of love that I would soon have to live without. My dad got married again 2 years later. Linda and her son Marcus, who is 3 years older than me, came into our life. They weren't merely family from the start. They became the family. I turned into furniture. Not in a fairy tale way, not in a dramatic or aggressive way, but in the quiet, unseen way that made me feel like I didn't matter. Marcus earned plaudits for getting good grades, but I hardly got a nod of appreciation at most. He got new stuff when he was 16, I got used stuff. He was set up to be the next head of the family business, while I was set up to be background scenery. My dad never hit me or yelled at me. He just looked through me, like he was looking through a glass at something far away that he couldn't see properly. And yet, in all of this, there was one person who could see me. Margaret Ivans, my grandmother. She called every Sunday without fail. She wanted to know about my friends, dreams, and schoolwork. She told me that someone had faith in me. She would say, "You remind me of myself, Heather. Underappreciated, ignored, but able to do more than anyone knows." She passed away 2 years ago, leaving me with something that no one else knew about and that would affect my life years later. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the age of 20, my future was brutally interrupted. I was a sophomore at Yukon University, majoring in business, with a 3.8 GPA, scholarship applications pending, aspirations laid out, and a summer program in London already on my mind. Then there was the family gathering. Those 2 words had never meant anything positive. My father, with Linda on one side and that cool, measured look on his face, gave me the truth that I had been trying to ignore. "Hey, Heather, Marcus got into Wharton," he said, his voice calm and his palms folded. "We can pay for both your tuition and his program. You'll need to stop going to school for a while." Linda smiled, her teeth flawless, and her voice was full of warmth. "Heather, a girl doesn't need an MBA to have a good life. Someday you'll find a husband. That's what actually counts." I froze, not because I was shocked, but because I knew this was going to happen for 12 years. I added, "You promised Mom you would help me with my schoolwork." He didn't say anything. He said, in a hazy way, that things change. There was a scholarship fund that may have paid for my school. But Marcus understood. I didn't fight back. I nodded, and in my head, I promised myself that no one else would ever tell me how much I was worth. I left Fairfield for Boston with $2,000 in savings and a suitcase of clothes that screamed suburban suffocation. My first residence was a small studio over a laundromat in Allston that was only 400 square feet. The radiator made noise all night, and the walls were so thin that I could hear my neighbors' lives. I ate ramen and bagels from the cafe where I worked. I lived on minimum wage. But this was the first time I was making anything that was just mine. Walter Barnes, a gruff CEO of a logistics company, saw something in me that my family never did. "Hey, Heather, you have a brain. Use it," he said to me one afternoon. I did it. Nights spent studying about business basics, operations, and supply chain management. I went to MIT Open Course instead of my old university. The end of college didn't mean the end of learning. I didn't call my family. I ripped up birthday checks my father sent me as a sign of how little they cared. 4 years later, I had enough money to create Meridian Consulting, LLC. Just me, a laptop, a rented desk, and the silent desire that my family had tried to kill. There was no LinkedIn, no news releases, and no personal renown. My name was purposefully hidden. I had learned that staying quiet was my shield. But I was quietly creating a stronghold. By the time I was 30, I had 15 people, $4 million in sales each year, and offices in Boston's Back Bay. I didn't wear Cartier to show off, I wore it because I had earned it. I helped businesses make their logistics more efficient, cut expenses, and speed up their work. And one of my biggest customers? The business that my dad owns. Of course, they didn't know it. My crew, my lawyer, and my CFO Daniel Reeves all looked over the deal. At conferences, my father inadvertently complimented the work of his own daughter, not knowing that the genius he thought belonged to the company was me. 3 weeks ago, he got a formal invitation to his retirement celebration. I thought about throwing it away. Then I remembered my grandmother's voice, the years of silence, the broken promises, and the doors being shut. I said yes to the RSVP, not to make up, not to hope, but to see. To end things on my own terms. The Fairfield Country Club was the same fancy valet service, the same Swarovski chandeliers, and the same mix of old money and young ambition. I wore a basic black Valentino dress, pearl earrings from my grandma, a Cartier watch, and a Hermes Birkin purse. I worked hard for everything I had. Linda stopped me at the door, looked me up and down, and spoke in a sweet voice. "Hey, Heather, you came." I smiled. The Connecticut elite were buzzing around inside the room. Marcus, my stepbrother, didn't even look at me. He had his arm around a model thin blonde. He was giving his vision for the company's future, which is typical of Marcus, full of confidence but no substance. I sat at table 14, which was far away from the family and in a corner of nice smiles from strangers. I watched with a glass of champagne in my hand. Every syllable was heard thanks to acoustics. My dad talked about Meridian Consulting while he was in charge. He told a client, "They've been transformative," not knowing he was praising me. Marcus came up to the patio. He said, "The wayward daughter. I hear you started a business. How long will it last before it fails?" I could smell his Tom Ford fragrance and feel how full of himself he was. I smiled to myself. "Marcus, you can believe whatever makes you feel better. You will wish you had treated me better after tonight." The lights in the ballroom went out. The stage has a spotlight on it. My father's speech, which he had worked on for decades, included every name, every gratitude, and every credit, except for the one individual who had been the backbone of his firm. Then it was time for the family part. He found me in the crowd, where the spotlight was swinging. Not a degree, not a job, just living off the family. At least she came. People started to laugh. Real laughing, painful because it doesn't know. I stood motionless and waited. Then I stepped up, raised my champagne glass, and said, "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad. You will never see me again after this." I left. There was silence, except for the sound of my heels. For the first time in 12 years, I could breathe easily. My dad tried to stop me, but Linda's face contorted in anger and Marcus spat incredulity. I didn't move, say sorry, or explain. I got in my car and drove away. 20 minutes outside of Fairfield, I sat in my Tesla with the engine running and my hands on the wheel. My heart was finally at ease. This story is for anyone who has ever felt like they didn't matter in their family or been told they were worthless. Sometimes, leaving isn't only a way to be free. It's reclamation. In the spring, Boston can make you think that the city is full of opportunities, but it can actually eat you up and spit you out before you even know it. I came to Alston with just a suitcase, a laptop, and the stronghold that had been built up in me over 12 years of being ignored. There were a lot of people on the streets, and it was cold and loud. The small studio apartment I rented above a laundromat had a subtle smell of mildew and detergent, but it was mine. Mine to fight in. Mine to win. I began at the bottom. The cafe where I worked wanted me to work early in the morning, late at night, and be patient with those who could see I was new to the job. But every time I handed someone their too expensive cappuccino with a grin, I told myself that this will pass. I wouldn't stay in this coffee shop forever. I spent my evenings learning. My safe place was MIT OpenCourseWare. I like learning about supply chain management, logistics, operations, and finance. There were evenings when I fell asleep at my work, with spilled coffee on my keyboard and textbooks all around me like a fortress. Most of the kids my age were partying and having fun with their independence. I was quietly constructing my kingdom in the shadows, where no one could see me. The first year was very hard. My money ran out. Landlords became tired of waiting. The scent from the laundry room above me got stronger every week, but I held on to the idea of a business that was mine and that no one could ignore. Capable of more than anyone knows, my grandmother said. Every morning, I spoke them to myself like a prayer. Walter Barnes came next. He was a regular at the cafe. He was older, with piercing eyes, and an impatient air that made most people feel small. He saw me balance trays, fix orders, and run a small group of part-time workers. "Kid," he said one afternoon, "you're not made for cappuccinos. You can handle more than this cafe." He gave me a card. "Send me your resume by email." I wasn't even sure if I had a resume. I didn't know anyone. I wasn't sure of myself. But the way he spoke sparked a fire in me that I didn't know I still had. My first true taste of the business world was working for Walter's tiny shipping company. He trusted me to look into how things were going, suggest adjustments, and eventually lead small groups. He didn't compliment me very often, but he never ignored me. His quiet approbation meant more to me than any praise my family had ever given me. I went from being an assistant coordinator to an operations strategist in 2 years. I made efficiency models that saved Walter hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. By the time I was 24, I had enough knowledge, experience, and guts to do what most people would call crazy: start my own business. Meridian Consulting, LLC. I thought of the name one night when I couldn't sleep and was looking out the dirty window of my studio. A meridian is a line that runs through the whole world and connects two places. I liked the idea of connecting people, filling in gaps, and helping businesses get from where they are to where they could be. It seemed like fate, even though no one else could see it yet. The initial office was small, just big enough for my laptop, a desk, and a filing cabinet. Daniel Reeves, a recent graduate of MIT, was my first hiring. He was just as hungry as I was. He worked hard and hardly ever complained about the small desk or the lights that kept going out. I slowly put together a team of 5 people, each of whom I picked because they had promise, were flexible, and had tenacity. People didn't come to see me. I had to follow them down, and many laughed at me because I was just another consultant from Boston with no experience. I pitched all the time, sometimes from my car in parking lots and other times across coffee tables in loud cafes. Every no made me stronger. Every no made me more determined. I realized fast that being liked doesn't make you confident, understanding your worth does, even if no one else does. By the time Meridian Consulting was 26, it had its first significant client, a logistics company in Worcester that was having trouble with inefficiencies. We changed the way they do business, decreased expenses by 15, and sped up delivery by 25. The CEO of the company was shocked. He remarked, "Heather, you did this in 3 months," with incredulity in his voice. I smiled, but inside I was screaming with joy. Success brought new problems. I had to hire additional people, handle payroll, settle disputes amongst employees, and convince investors who were unsure that a 26-year-old woman from a broken family could run $1 million business. Some days, I quietly cried in my workplace because I felt so much pressure. But the tears never stopped me. They made me remember that I was alive and that I was accomplishing something my family never thought I could do. I also discovered the hard truth about being invisible in the business world at this time. A lot of clients thought that my assistant Daniel was the one who came up with Meridian. Some people even talked over me in meetings, challenging my choices as if my age or gender made my experience less valid. Every meeting was a test. I answered with facts, results, and calmness that couldn't be shaken. Being invisible had trained me to watch, listen, and then hit the right spot. Meridian Consulting had 15 people, made $4 million a year, and had contracts in Boston, New York, and Chicago by the time they were 28. I had learned how to give tasks to others, how to create a company culture based on respect and merit, and how to keep others from messing with my vision. But I still felt alone in a lot of ways. I didn't have much of a personal life, my relationships were short-lived, I was too busy with work, or I was afraid to let anybody see my scars. My parents never called me. There was no noise on birthdays. The world I had made was my safe place, but it also reminded me of the family I had left behind and the rage and sadness I had kept inside. Then I got an email from the Fairfield Country Club about my dad's retirement celebration. The first thing I wanted to do was remove it. But something stopped me, something that said softly, "Heather, you have the right to see them now. To show you that you are not who they said you were." I said yes to the invitation, knowing that I would go as the woman they could no longer ignore, not the small girl they had been ignoring. This was not about making up. It was about being there and taking my place in a world that had long denied me that right. At that point, I saw that being invisible had been a blessing in disguise. It pushed me to make things, to keep going, and to build a life from nothing. It taught me how to live, how to do well, and, most significantly, how to know my worth without ever asking for it. Before I left for Fairfield that night, I looked in the mirror. My reflection looked back at me, confident, well-groomed, and untouchable. I had worked hard for everything I had. They didn't have control over anything they thought they did, my work, my decisions, or my life. I was free. But freedom has its own problems. I knew that it wouldn't be easy to step into that ballroom. It would make me face ghosts I had been avoiding for a long time. It would put every bit of calm I had worked so hard to build to the test. But I was ready. I wasn't only the daughter that Heather didn't care about. I was Heather, the one who made her own future. And here was the time I would prove it, not to them, but to myself. The brochure said the Fairfield Country Club would be perfect, and it was. The floors were shiny, there were crystal chandeliers, and the smell of fine flowers mixed with the smell of hors d'oeuvres. I got there early, like I always did. My heels clicked quietly on the marble, my posture was perfect, and my face was a mask of calm control. As I walked through the big lobby, I felt the usual ache in my chest. It wasn't fear, but the weight of history. Remembering birthdays that were forgotten, harsh comments that were meant to be helpful, and being disregarded for the smallest mistakes. But I had been practicing for this moment for years. They didn't know me as the scared, ignored girl I used to be. I was Heather, made strong by silence and effort. People were laughing and talking politely in the ballroom. My father, who was tall and calm, said hello to coworkers and old friends, not knowing, or trying not to know, that his daughter had come. My mother was the consummate hostess, standing close with a polished grin that could captivate a room while hiding her genuine disdain. I saw Daniel by the bar, and he gave me a small nod. It was nice to have him there. Meridian's crew had pushed me to let them come too, but I had graciously said no. This was my fight, my platform. My father finally saw me. His eyes got a little bigger, but not because he was happy. He was surprised. A flash of recognition crossed his face, as if he were witnessing the woman I had become for the first time. Heather, he murmured, and his voice showed just a hint of doubt. You came. I did, I said, calm and measured, but with the weight of years of not being there. I wouldn't miss this event. He grinned awkwardly, showing both pride and discomfort, and motioned for me to sit down. But I didn't sit down right away. I watched. I heard my coworkers' quiet murmurs, my distant cousin's sideways glances, and the polite but cautious interest of those who only knew me as a youngster. As the speeches started, I respectfully listened and nodded when it was appropriate. My thoughts went over every detail and every meeting that had brought me here. And then came the moment that changed everything, my father's toast. He talked about being loyal, serving others, and having a career that was founded on hard effort. He talked about how great his coworkers were, told stories, and then talked about his family, the same family that had disregarded me, dismissed me, and overlooked my achievements. The words were apparent, even though they weren't said. I wasn't in that image. Something inside me broke, not with rage, but with understanding. I recognized that I wasn't here to get their approval, recognition, or praise. It was about seeing them from the point of view of someone they could no longer define. I had said how much I was worth, and that was enough. When the ovation stopped, I walked up to the podium, and everyone in the room got silent out of curiosity. My dad's eyes got bigger, and my mom's smile froze in place. I cleared my throat. I started with, "Thank you for the invitation." My voice was firm, strong, and dominating. It's an honor to see a career that has influenced many people, including me. But I want to make one thing clear, I'm not here to make up or seek approval. I'm here because I can be. Because I deserve it. There were whispers all across the room. I kept their attention by looking at my parents, cousins, and co-workers. I am proud of the life, career, company, and future I have made. My name is Heather, and I am visible. No one made me visible, I chose to be. That is my choice alone. The room was quiet, and the tension was thick. I couldn't read my father's face. My mom's lips were squeezed together in a thin line. I stopped for a while to let my words sink in. I didn't come here to ask for your acknowledgement, I said, my voice steady. I came to remind myself, and maybe you, that the person you dismissed, ignored, or underestimated has grown beyond those limits. And I shall keep growing, whether you notice it or not. I turned around and headed to the door. Every step sounded like a drumbeat of victory. People whispered behind me, some of them curious and some of them judging. I didn't care. I had done what I had to do. The cold January air outside hit me hard, reminding me that the world outside that ballroom was big, hard, and all mine to explore. I took a deep breath and let the cold wind blow away the last bits of stress. I felt a rush of liberation like nothing else I had ever felt. It was peaceful on the way home. Daniel called, and his voice was full of astonishment. "That was amazing, Heather. You didn't just come. You owned it." I grinned a little. It wasn't about having power over anyone else. It was about being in charge of myself. That's the only approval I need. The days that followed were a mix of looking back and looking forward. I learned that freedom wasn't just letting go of the past, it was facing it, making my presence known, and carefully choosing my route. Meridian Consulting kept doing well. New contracts came in, and they were bigger and more complicated than the ones before. But now that I had the memories of the ballroom behind me, I felt more sure of myself when I made each choice. I knew how important it was to be seen and how strong it was to take up space in a world that often tried to make women invisible. I started mentoring young professionals, especially women, and I taught them not just about logistics and operations but also about how to be strong, have self-worth, and have the guts to face people who question you. I could see the same desire and determination in their eyes that had previously pushed mine. And as I helped others, I saw that my own story, which was full of hard times, rejection, and success, was not just mine. It was a plan, a map for others to follow the same dangerous path I had once trodden alone. At age 30, I found an equilibrium I had never had before. The girl who had been neglected and pushed away had grown into a woman whose presence could no longer be ignored. Yes, the scars were still there, but they were now proof of survival, progress, and a spirit that wouldn't be broken. And in the quiet times, when the world looked silent, I let myself grin for the first time in a long time, knowing that every choice, every battle, and every moment of being invisible had brought me to this place. I was free. I was in plain sight. I was now, without a doubt, myself. The days after the Fairfield party were calmer than I thought they would be. Not completely quiet, but peaceful enough to let me think. The city lights made long streaks across the floor-to-ceiling windows as I went back to my apartment. The place was fully mine. No one else had any expectations for it, and it was free of judgment. It was full of possibilities. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the window, letting the city pulse below me. The world outside was still the same, but I had changed. Every time I looked in the mirror or walked over my polished floors, I was reminded of the lady I had become. Heather wasn't the shy girl who stayed out of trouble and hid in the shadows. She was forceful, purposeful, and not afraid to take up space. The change was clear at Meridian Consulting. Our projects, which were already big, got even bigger. We got new clients, including startups with big ideas, big companies eager to shake things up, and even multinational companies interested in our unique approach. My colleagues loved the challenge, and my energy and fresh clarity helped them do their best. Every morning, I arrived into the workplace with a strong sense of purpose that spread over the floor. Daniel was always there for me, and his gentle support kept me grounded. He understood that I sometimes needed space and never doubted my determination. Instead, he encouraged it when it was needed. We worked together to come up with plans for growth, make operations more efficient, and build relationships that had earlier appeared unachievable. But as Meridian expanded, so did my knowledge of what it means to be a leader. I learned that success wasn't just about numbers or awards, it was about how you affected other people. I started helping young professionals, many of whom were women who were going through the same things I had. I taught them how to be strong, stand up for themselves, and get around in professional settings that often didn't take women with ambition seriously. After I led a workshop for new leaders one day, a young woman came up to me. She had a lot of tense energy in her eyes. "Miss Heather," she said, her voice shaking a little, "I've always felt like no one sees me at work. It feels like no matter what I do, it's never enough. How did you make that different?" How did you get them to notice you? I smiled softly because I saw my own reflection in her hesitation. I said, it's not about them seeing you. It's about looking at yourself. The world can't ignore you when you recognize your worth. It starts with seeing things from the inside. Every choice, every decision, and every stand you take creates a presence that can't be erased. I saw her face go from doubt to determination, and I felt a burst of purpose. It wasn't just about me anymore. My journey, my hardships, and my successes could help other people get up. My personal life also changed. I let myself have peaceful, motionless moments, like long walks in the park, evenings spent reading, and dinners with friends I had picked on purpose. I learned that freedom wasn't just about getting away from people who didn't believe in me, it was also about making a life that was truly mine, full of relationships that gave me energy instead of taking it away. I was surprised when I saw Heather's reflection in the mirror one night. I saw the same resolve, but I also saw vulnerability, which showed that being strong didn't mean losing the softer elements of yourself. I had learned that power wasn't being mean, it was being there, having a goal, and having the strength to stay true to myself even when people doubted or ignored me. As Meridian grew, chances came from places they didn't expect. A big worldwide client asked us to cooperate with them on a full scale, not only because we were efficient but also because our vision was clear. The negotiations were difficult, high stakes, and demanding, but I was able to handle them with a level of confidence I had never had before. Everything, from the logistics to the presentations, was done with great care. Every conversation gave off a sense of confidence. The sale went through, not because of luck, but because I finally accepted my full potential. While he was doing well at work, things changed in his family life. After we made a big deal, my dad wrote me a short note of congratulations. It was a small gesture, but it made me feel a combination of emotions. My mother also started to reach out more often, but I still kept my distance. I came to the conclusion that my relationship with them no longer determined how much I valued myself. If they did recognize them, it was a bonus, not a need. My evenings became my safe place. I often sat by the windows with my journal and thought about what I had learned and accomplished that day. I wrote about how ambition may be tempered with empathy, how resilience can be built in isolation, and how being authentically yourself can be a powerful thing. I invited some of the younger professionals to seminars and workshops I conducted, and these papers became a guide for them. Every tale I told and every anecdote I gave made it clearer that problems weren't flaws, they were building blocks. Friendships changed as well. I made friends who valued honesty, commitment, and helping each other improve. There were times when we laughed till late at night, talked about our aspirations and failures, and felt like we belonged. The people I was around showed the ideals that were important to me. They reminded me that the past shaped me but didn't define me. Heather's life had changed, but it wasn't for free. There were days when memories of being fired, doubted, and not being seen came back, which made me lose confidence. On those days, I relied on rituals that helped me feel stable, including meditation, reflection, and purposeful action. I told myself that the power of presence wasn't something that came and went, it was something that grew and was cared for every day. I took chances that I thought were worth it in business. Things that would have scared me previously now felt exciting. I trusted my gut, which had been refined by years of watching and doing. And with each victory, my confidence grew, not because the world agreed with me, but because I had learned to trust my own judgment. One project that stands out in my mind was coming up with a logistics plan for a conglomerate that was growing across Europe and Asia. The stakes were bigger than anything Meridian had ever done before, and the scale was huge. But I went into it with careful planning, clear communication, and a strong will. The outcome was not only a successful endeavor but also an illustration that leadership entails clarity, flexibility, and fostering trust in others. Yes, Heather had grown up, but she had also changed. She was no longer reactive, she was intentional. She carefully planned her course, embraced freedom with mindfulness, and built influence with honesty. Her journey wasn't a straight line, it was nuanced, textured, and full of lessons that affected every choice, every interaction, and every victory. By the end of the year, Meridian had not only gotten bigger, but it had also gotten more well-known. People wanted to work with our consulting firm because of its creativity, dependability, and vision. But the biggest change was in me. I had learned that visibility was not just about being confrontational, it was also about being real all the time, being there on purpose, and having the confidence to completely live one's life. I thought about the difference between the girl who had been invisible and the woman I had become in quiet times. The path was hard, full of doubt and anxiety, but it taught me a deep truth: power is not given, it is taken. You don't get respect just because you're born with it, you have to earn it. And most importantly, freedom isn't something you find, it's something you make. There were no more shadows or doubts in Heather's story. It was a story about being in charge of your own life, being strong, and always being true to yourself. And when she stared out at the horizon, the possibilities were endless. They weren't limited by past mistakes or old relationships, instead, they were made clearer by her sense of purpose, her strong character, and her willingness to keep going. The fresh air in the spring made me think about how quickly time can go by. Heather's world, which used to be limited to narrow goals and careful steps, now spanned countries, offices, and client portfolios. Meridian Consulting had developed more than I had hoped, but I soon learned that growth is never straight. Success was exciting, but it also came with problems that required strength, forethought, and calmness at all times. One Monday morning, we got an important message from our European division. A very important client, who was both a large source of income and a source of international credibility, had said they were unhappy with a recent project. The problem wasn't small: delivery times had dropped, and teams had trouble communicating with each other. The client said they would cancel the contract. I could feel the familiar throb of anxiety, but I didn't let it take over. I called my colleagues into the conference room, where the metropolitan skyline shone through the glass walls, showing how determined I was. "Listen," I said, my voice firm, "we do have a problem. But there is a way to fix it. Every time something goes wrong, you have a chance to show that you can lead, adapt, and be capable. We will take responsibility for this, fix it, and make sure the client stays with us and trusts our vision again." The squad nodded, and you could see that they trusted each other. I split up the work, gave clear instructions, and set up direct channels of communication with the client. After that, there were long nights of strategy meetings, video conferences across time zones, and constant changes. On one call that was really tense, the client's representative, a tough woman named Claudia, made her point very clear. She said, "This is not okay," in a chilly voice. "We expected things to be clear and efficient. We can't put up with blunders like that." I stopped for a while to think about what I wanted to say. "Claudia," I said, "I get why you're upset. We are fully responsible. Our objective is to take care of every issue by Friday. We will give you daily updates, and I will personally check on the progress. We don't ask for your patience without reason, we will deserve it." She was quiet for a bit, then she said, "I will hold you to that, Ms. Heather." The next few days were quite hard for me. I set up meetings, worked out differences between reports, and helped teams from 3 different countries get along with each other. I was tired, but I told myself that great leadership wasn't about not being tired, it was about keeping going even when I was. The resolution was done by Friday night. The client accepted the changes and praised not only the solutions but also the professionalism and devotion shown. I took a short breath and realized that this was more than a win for Meridian, it was proof that I could lead under duress. While I was dealing with work problems, I was also dealing with personal problems at the same time. Daniel saw that I was getting more and more tired. One night, he stated to Heather, "You're carrying everything on your shoulders." His face showed how worried he was. "You need to let someone in, even if it's just a tiny bit." I glanced at him, feeling both proud and weak. "I know," I said quietly. "But letting go feels like giving up control, and I've learned the hard way that mistakes can cost a lot." He took my hand. Being a leader doesn't mean accomplishing everything by yourself. It's about understanding when to let someone else do the work. Yes, you constructed everything by yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to keep it up by yourself. His remarks stuck with me and sank into my mind throughout the next few weeks. I started to give my team greater responsibility, trust their skills without micromanaging, and let them flourish. In doing so, I learned a new way to lead, by working together, not by telling people what to do. But life was still full of problems. We heard that a competitor was trying to steal our most important clients by offering them big incentives and promises of speedier delivery. The business was changing, competition was getting tougher, and Meridian's name was both our shield and our liability. I called an emergency meeting to plan. There were charts, predictions, and analysis of the competition all over the boardroom table. I spoke to the crew in a firm voice. "We are not defined by what others do to try to bring us down. What makes us different is our effort, our vision, and our honesty. They can't copy the trust, culture, and dedication we've developed. We will strengthen our relationships, improve communication, and make sure our clients know they are important to us, not just as numbers, but as partners. This is our chance to rise, not fall." Weeks stretched into months of careful planning, talks, and promises. It was hard work, but Meridian came out stronger. Clients who were impressed by how proactive and open we were confirmed their allegiance. At that point, I understood that genuine power isn't in avoiding problems, but in tackling them with steadfast focus and strength. But personal life too needed equal emphasis. My mother's health started to go worse slowly, but she tried to hide it with casual phone calls and half-hearted promises. I made a point of being there for her by visiting her on weekends and taking care of her needs while also meeting my work obligations. It was a difficult dance, but it was important. It was a reminder that personal duties and ambition frequently come together in ways that need compassion and patience. Heather's growth was put to the test during a very difficult merger deal. The deal may have made Meridian a global consulting giant, but it also had risks that could have ruined years of progress. I read every clause carefully, looking for any problems, making backup plans, and bargaining with perfect accuracy. The process was hard, with times of doubt, stress, and tiredness, but also times of excitement. At the last meeting to negotiate, I stood in front of the board with papers in hand and confidence showing in every move I made. The questions were harsh and the worries were immediate, but I answered them with clarity, logic, and vision. At the end of the meeting, the board members nodded in agreement, sure that the merger would work and happy with how thorough our plan was. The deal went through, which solidified Meridian's presence around the world. The win was great, but the lesson stayed with me. I was never alone in my victory. It was the end of faith, hard work, teamwork, and never giving up. Heather stood on top of this peak and thought about the voyage. Every problem, every fight, and every night without sleep had made her the woman she was now. She had learned that strength wasn't only about what you did, but also about how you handled tough times with grace and wisdom. Evenings became times to think. I was at my apartment, writing in my journal as the city lights made the walls look golden. I wrote down not only the good times but also the bad times, the times when I was unsure, and the times when I was scared that had made me who I am. Every entry made me more sure that resilience is built through experience, tested through struggle, and made stronger by decision. Friendships also got stronger. Co-workers became friends, and friends became family. We celebrated our wins, shared our problems, and dealt with the unknowns together. Heather learned how strong community can be, not only in business but in life in general. Daniel was always there for her, solid, supportive, and understanding. Our relationship grew stronger over time, thanks to mutual respect, common goals, and the understanding that each person grew best when they were in a relationship. Heather thought about the hard times and the good times as the year came to an end. She knew that neither was easy, but both were essential. There had been many hurdles along the way to leadership, self-discovery, and empowerment that had challenged every part of her. But when she faced them, she learned not only what she could do, but also who she really was. Heather's story was no longer about living, it was about mastering. Mastery over yourself, your goals, and the fine line between work and personal happiness. She had gotten through hard times and come out stronger, smarter, and more determined. And as she looked out over the horizon, the future sparkled with unlimited possibilities, ready for the next part of her amazing trip. Winter came silently, covering the city in gentle colors of gray and silver. Heather regularly walked along the riverbank near her apartment, her mind going back and forth between thinking about the past and looking forward to the future. Meridian Consulting had achieved new heights, but she realized that success wasn't a one-time occurrence, it was a living, breathing force that needed ongoing attention, change, and vision. A charity organization asked Meridian to work with them on a project to empower women in business. This was the first clue that things were changing. Heather's pulse raced with excitement. Finally, a project that combined her professional skills with her personal beliefs. I knew how much this project meant to me when I met with the foundation's board for the first time. Many of the women portrayed had to deal with problems that were comparable to the ones Heather had to deal with as she rose. Their problems were the same for everyone: societal expectations, professional doubt, and the need to constantly balance personal goals with family duties. I talked with passion and laid forth a plan to help promising women leaders by giving them mentors, training, and money. The board paid close attention and nodded when I said that my plan was a good mix of reality and vision. At the end of the discussion, everyone agreed, and Heather had a deep feeling of satisfaction since her career, purpose, and personal mission all came together in an unusual way. In the meantime, Daniel advised that we slow down for a while. We need to take a step back sometimes, he added, his eyes showing worry and caring. Even the strongest leaders need time to recharge and get back in touch with themselves. We planned a trip to the country to get away from meetings, emails, and the constant noise of city life. The days were basic but refreshing. They included lengthy walks through meadows with frost on the grass, calm evenings beside a roaring fire, and conversations that went deep into hopes, concerns, and dreams. Heather learned how much she had ignored her own mental health in order to reach her goals at this retreat. When I got back to the city, I made small modifications to my daily life. I started my mornings with meditation, journaling, and thinking about things. These tiny things helped me stay calm in the middle of the craziness. In the evenings, people had time to themselves to read, cook, or just walk around the peaceful streets. These experiences, even if they seemed small, helped build resilience, emotional clarity, and a new way of looking at things. But the peace didn't last long. Meridian had to deal with an unexpected problem. A big change in technology could make our consulting approaches useless. AI platforms and automated solutions promised to get things done faster and for less money. A lot of clients started to wonder if strategic consulting conducted by people was worth it. I called an immediate meeting of my executive team because I knew that change was important. I said, "We're not here to race each other on speed alone. Our strength comes from our ability to see things clearly, be creative, and build relationships. Technology is not a replacement, it is a tool. We will use AI to make things go more smoothly, but we will always need our human touch, judgment, and sophisticated strategy. It wasn't easy to put into action. To keep trust, teams needed training, workflows had to be changed, and client communications had to be carefully managed. Heather worked very hard, making sure that every step improved Meridian's reputation for excellence by mixing strategic oversight with hands-on effort. Even though I was under a lot of strain at work, my personal life changed in ways I didn't expect. My mother's health, which was formerly a small worry, needed more attention. My weekends were full of visits to hospitals, meetings with specialists, and long talks. I learned that I have tolerance I didn't realize I had and that I could care for others outside of work. At the same time, Daniel and I looked at ways to make our life together bigger. While respecting each other's pace and goals, we talked about getting married, going on trips, and even starting a kid. The talks were full of hope, honesty, and a shared understanding that personal happiness was linked to professional purpose. As spring drew near once more, a significant international conference awaited, an occasion for Heather to address a global audience, disseminating her experiences, ideas, and vision for leadership, innovation, and resilience. Getting ready for the keynote was both exciting and scary. I thought about my path, the good and bad times, the people who helped me and the people who tested me, and I turned these into a story that was both helpful and motivating. As I walked on stage, the conference hall was full of excitement. Hundreds of people looked at me, some with doubt, some with interest, and some with inspiration. Heather's voice didn't only say things, it also showed that she meant what she said. I stand before you, I said, not as someone who has never failed or someone who has never doubted. I am here because I have learned to accept challenges, turn failures into chances, and see that being a leader is not about control but about vision, compassion, and influence. We don't evaluate true success by what we do alone. Instead, we measure it by the difference we make in other people's lives and the legacy we build through integrity, empowerment, and mentorship. People clapped in the hall, but what mattered most was that my story, Heather's story, resonated with them. The hardships and victories were universal, and my journey could motivate others to overcome their own problems. Heather felt like she had a new purpose when she got back from the conference. Meridian was doing well, and my personal life was full. The two together made me feel quite happy. But I still knew that growth was happening all the time. Life required me to be alert, flexible, and always think about what I was doing. I was alone in my flat on a tranquil night, looking out at the city lights. I took a rare opportunity to think about the young lady who used to be afraid of taking risks, didn't believe in her own value, and had a hard time standing up for herself in a world where males were in charge. She was still inside me, but now she was stronger, wiser, and more experienced. Women who had taken part in Meridian's empowerment program wrote letters to tell their tales of how they had changed, how their ambition had been reignited, and how their confidence had grown. I read each one with wonder and humility, realizing that being a leader had an effect on more than just business metrics and boardrooms. It changed lives, shaped destinies, and gave people hope. I realized that Heather's quest was no longer just about her own goals. It had grown into something bigger, a mission to make positive changes, to teach, to lead, and to motivate. It was no longer enough to sign contracts or make money to be considered successful. Now, success was defined by the power one had to make a difference with honesty and the lives one touched with kindness and wisdom. But even as Heather's happiness rose, she stayed on guard. There would still be problems, new hazards would come up, and the delicate balance between work and personal life would need to be watched all the time. But now that I had experience, clarity, and a group of friends to back me, I faced each day with confidence, knowing that my compass was resilience, integrity, and vision. At the end of the year, there was a modest party for close friends, family, and co-workers to celebrate their successes. People laughed, told stories, and thanked each other for the hard times they had been through and the wins they had won. Heather looked across the room and saw the tapestry of people, experiences, and lessons that had led her to this point. Heather realized a basic fact in the quiet of the night: life had no limits, not because problems went away, but because growth and determination turned them into chances. Every difficulty made them stronger, every victory gave them more purpose, and every relationship made the road more meaningful. Heather felt a sense of peaceful excitement as I got ready for the year ahead. The future was full of promise, even though it was unwritten and unexpected. I had learned to accept uncertainty, to find strength in being weak, and to see that the real measure of success was not what I had, but what I had grown: resilience, wisdom, and a life lived with purpose. Heather's story was still going on, but it had reached a point of deep satisfaction. She had faced challenges, pursued her goals, built relationships, and found the strength within herself to lead, inspire, and make a lasting impression on the world. She grinned when the first light of dawn hit the skyline, ready for whatever came next. Spring had finally come, bringing with it a spirit of hope and regeneration to the city. Heather woke up to sunlight streaming into her flat. The soft warmth made her feel like the world was full with opportunities. After years of unending desire, times of self-doubt, and innumerable struggles, both inside and outside of herself, Heather realized that true fulfillment is a mix of purpose, connections, and the legacy one leaves behind. Meridian Consulting had become more than just a business, it had become a way to change things. Heather's philosophy of combining insight, empathy, and invention had led to both financial success and a culture of mentoring and empowerment. The idea that leadership meant more than just being in the boardroom was at the heart of every new project and every client interaction. The Women's Empowerment Program, which is now in its third year, has had amazing effects. People who had started businesses, gone back to school, and taken up leadership roles they had earlier thought were impossible sent in stories. Heather kept a private notebook for each story, reading every letter, message, and testimony. Each one made her remember the deep truth she had learned: influence was most important when it helped other people thrive. Heather got an invitation one morning that made her feel both excited and humbled. An international foundation asked her to be the main speaker at a global summit on women's leadership and social innovation. People from all around the world who are leaders in their fields, make changes, and come up with new ideas would come to the event. It was a chance to share ideas and give people hope on a large scale. As Heather got ready to give her keynote speech, she thought about her own journey, the doubts she had in the beginning of her career, the challenges she had faced, the mentors who had helped her, and the times when she had doubted herself the most. She understood that her tale was not unique because it was unusual, but because it was relatable, a path marked by strength, bravery, and change. Heather stood in front of thousands of people at the top. She talked about more than just business strategy. She also talked about the human heart behind every decision, the fortitude it takes to face what society expects of you, and the vision it takes to make real change. People gave her standing ovations and made strong connections with her comments. After the session, a lot of questions came in, all of which showed a willingness to learn, grow, and make a difference. Heather came home full of energy but also deep in thought. She had always wanted to be successful in her career, but now she knew that the most lasting thing she would do in her life would be to touch other people's lives, give them chances, and teach them values. Daniel, who was always there for her, reminded her that balance was equally important for happiness. He continued softly, "Impact is important, but so is the quiet life we make for ourselves, the relationships we build, and the happiness we share when we aren't getting praise and awards. They started to think about how they could make their shared future bigger, like by doing community service, traveling to learn about different cultures, and maybe even creating a family. These plans weren't based on duty, they were based on a shared desire for a life full of love, connection, and purpose. Heather's impact on Meridian grew as she helped train the next group of leaders. Every mentee had their own set of problems, ideas, and goals. Heather's advice combined strategic thinking with emotional intelligence. She taught not only how to do well, but also how to deal with moral difficulties, handle losses, and accept change. Seeing these young professionals do well was quite rewarding and proved that real leadership is about giving others power. In the middle of all these successes, thinking about oneself was still important. Heather made time for peaceful moments, including early morning walks by the river, reading or writing in the evening, and quiet weekends in nature. These rituals helped her find clarity, emotional strength, and thankfulness. They reminded her that fulfillment could be found in both stillness and action. Heather was going through a bunch of emails from people who had taken part in the empowerment project when she came across a story that really moved her. A woman from a tiny town talked about how having a mentor, getting advice, and getting money helped her launch a business that now employs dozens of women. "You didn't just teach me how to succeed, you taught me how to believe in myself, trust my abilities, and help others as I rise," she wrote. Heather's eyes filled with tears. This was the legacy she had always wanted to leave behind. It wasn't about making money or getting praise, it was about making a meaningful difference in people's lives, restoring their faith, and helping them achieve their ambitions. The effects of leadership, kindness, and dedication were deep and wide. As the year went on, Heather took advantage of chances to make an even bigger difference. She worked with schools to set up scholarship programs, gave governments advice on long-term economic projects, and spoke at conferences that brought together technology, leadership, and social innovation. But through it all, she stayed true to herself, putting authenticity over celebrity and connection over recognition. Heather's personal life also thrived at the same time. Daniel and she became closer, and their relationship got stronger because they had similar experiences, respected each other, and loved each other deeply. They built a house together that was warm, funny, and full of quiet moments of closeness. This showed that professional ambition and personal contentment could work together when addressed with intention. Heather set up a global virtual summit that brought together women leaders from different continents as the city got ready for the coming winter. The summit focused on working together to solve problems, mentoring people from other cultures, and sharing new ideas. Heather saw individuals learn, interact, and engage with each other, and she understood that her impact had crossed borders, giving hope and strength to people in regions she had never been to in person. Heather sat alone in her apartment one night, thinking about how her life had changed over time. She thought about the times she had doubted herself, the times she had questioned her worth, and the many problems she had to deal with. But every problem had been a chance to learn, every failure a chance to grow, and every success a chance to grow even more. Heather knew that the actual measure of a person's life was not how high they climbed, but how many people they helped along the way. She had helped herself and others grow, given them strength, and taught them how to be wise. She had learned that the best things a person could leave behind was strength, honesty, and kindness. The ladies she had mentored kept writing her letters, each one a sign of how guidance, belief, and encouragement can last a long time. Heather put these together into a collection, a life history of change and hope that shows how her trip has changed her life. The last chapter of the year came and went without a sound. Heather had a modest get-together with close friends, family, co-workers, and men's. There was a lot of thankfulness, introspection, and celebration that night, not for awards or praise, but for the journey they had all taken together, the lives they had changed, and the problems they had solved. Heather had been looking for a long time for a way to feel fulfilled, and she found it in laughter, meaningful stories, and quiet times of connection. Heather stepped out onto her balcony at the end of the night and looked at the city lights that sparkled like stars in the distance. She felt very calm because she knew that her path was not just about her own goals, but also about the lives she had changed, the dreams she had helped come true, and the hope she had given others. Heather's story, which had been going on for a long time, had reached a very important point. She had dealt with problems, taken advantage of chances, given people power, and built a life full of meaning, love, and effect. The horizon was still open and full of possibilities, but she now knew that the actual legacy was the light she left behind, the inspiration, the empowerment, and the good change that lasted long after the moment had passed. Heather smiled in the dark of night, a smile that came from being grateful, understanding, and deeply satisfied. She had learned the most important lesson, that life is not just about what you do, but also about having the bravery to develop, the kindness to help others, and the wisdom to leave a lasting, meaningful mark on the world. As the first light of morning painted the skyline, Heather moved into a future lit by purpose, strength, and the lasting power of hope. It was curiously quiet in the weeks after Ivan's logistics contract ended. It's too silent. There was a lot going on in my Back Bay office, emails pinging, project updates, and calls from clients. But there was also an undercurrent that was faint but clear. There was a change happening that I couldn't put my finger on yet. I felt that breaking links with my father's business and finally putting limits would make me feel better. And it did, in a way. The burden of years of unseen work and being undervalued has been lifted. But I understood that serenity is rarely a straight line, it often comes with its own problems. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning in the form of a series of strange questions. Not from clients or partners, but from law firms, consultants, and financial auditors who had never talked to us before. I thought they were just normal things like background checks, market research, or possible purchases, but the pattern rapidly grew scary. Every call and every email seemed to be working toward the same goal, finding out who owns Meridian Consulting. Daniel, my CFO and best friend, saw it too. We sat together in the corner office, with the Boston skyline behind us. He frowned as he grasped a stack of letters. He tapped the papers and remarked, "Heather, this is different. These aren't normal requests for due diligence. They are aggressive. They are looking for something. And they keep going." I sat back in my chair and ran my finger along the edge of my coffee cup. Who would want to know? Everyone knows that we've been anonymous. We haven't put our name on anything public. Who would even care? Daniel thought for a moment. I think it's Ivan's logistics. Or someone who is close to your dad. They figured out what it would mean for them to lose our contract. They desire power. They want to know who did it. I didn't answer right away. I thought about that night at the retirement party when I got up and left. They laughed and looked shocked. My father had taken over my identity and value. And for the first time, I had both. But they didn't think I would do it quietly, on purpose, without any drama or theatrics. And now, after weeks of stillness, they were starting to realize how expensive it could be to underestimate me. Over the next few days, I carefully went over our security procedures, how we talked to clients, and how we kept things private. They looked over every contract, legal document, and conversation with the client. Meridian Consulting grew not just because we knew a lot, but also because we kept ourselves safe from being exposed. Now, that protection was being put to the test. My phone rang on Friday afternoon. I didn't know the number. A private line. "Hey, Heather Evans." The voice was calm, slow, and female. Claire Donovan is my name. I work as an investigator. I think you might have a problem that needs to be kept quiet. I got angry. And what kind of problem would that be? A person or group trying to find out who owns Meridian Consulting. They're going through legal documents, contracts, and even personal records. If your name gets out, it might be very bad for your business and your customers. I stopped moving. I was ready for problems, competition, and even business sabotage. But the thought that someone may go so far as to find Meridian and link it back to me personally was a level of hazard I hadn't entirely prepared for. Who did you work for? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Claire remarked, that's private. But they are organized, patient, and creative. You should think about every possible line of defense. I hung up the phone and called a meeting with Daniel, our lawyer, and my security consultant right away. We made a list of every possible weakness, including public documents, IP registrations, social media trails, corporation filings, and even ex-employees who might be willing or forced to share information. Daniel looked sad. Hey Heather, this is serious. We are not talking about a small leak or a PR issue. If your father or someone he knows finds out that you own something, they could try to use it against you in a legal, financial, or social way. They could try to tear down what you've achieved from the inside. I nodded, feeling that old rush of determination. Then we won't let them have the chance. We are in charge of Meridian Consulting. We are in charge of the story. And we didn't even know we were getting ready for this moment. The next task was to confine it. We looked over every client, contract, and correspondence to see if there was any risk of exposure. We made it harder for anybody to get to all of the company's documents, added secure digital signatures, and made the legal firewall that keeps Meridian's information safe from outside eyes more stronger. But containment wasn't enough. I had to change the game. I'd demonstrate someone who was trying to identify flaws that they were searching in the wrong area. I was up all night creating a backup plan. Scenario 1, a legal challenge in court. Scenario 2, being in the news. Scenario 3, money problems. Meridian Consulting was always safe in every situation. The goal of every move, reaction, and countermeasure was not to get back at the other side, but to safeguard the organization and keep its integrity. We were ready by Monday a.m. They had seen the attempts at investigation and the probing questions. My crew kept a close eye on them, writing down every contact and every attempt to get past our defenses. Meridian Consulting was now a fortress that was hard to get into but easy to move around in. I was proud of the many levels of security we had erected, but I understood that our strategy, patience, and discipline were what made us strong. The next thing that happened was unexpected. An email came in from a domain that wasn't registered in the US. Subject line, "We know who you are." I opened it slowly. There was only one sentence in the body: "Stop pretending, Heather. Not just your dad watches." Daniel read what I was reading and whistled softly. This isn't simply a business. Someone is taking things too personally. I felt that old familiar tension, the kind that comes before a fight and tests everything you've learned and every plan you've made. But I didn't feel helpless anymore, as I used to. I was no longer the girl at the dinner table who no one could see, the child who had to give up her future for someone else. I was Heather Evans, the CEO, founder, and strategist. I had the tools, the vision, and the faith of every mentor, past and present, who had believed in me. We looked at the email headers to try to find out where it came from, but it was very well hidden. The person or people who did this knew what they were doing. And that, in a way, made me happy. For the first time in years, I had a problem that required all of my intelligence, all of my survival instincts, and all of the lessons I had learned throughout the years of being underestimated. I called together my executive team. I said, "We're entering a new phase," in a calm but firm manner. "This isn't just business. This is about planning, being disciplined, and being alert. Meridian Consulting has always been about doing things well, but now we're going to show that we can bounce back. We're going to prove that nothing, not threats or intimidation, can take down what we've constructed." And for the first time in weeks, I felt the thrill of excitement and the rush of anticipation. This wasn't fear. This was an opportunity that only someone who has been driven to the point of being invisible could see. I sat back and thought about the wider picture as the lights of Boston flickered through the office windows. The anonymous threat, the probing questions, and the subtle attempts to make me uneasy were all part of a bigger plan to see how strong, smart, and determined I was. And I wanted to go through it with the same grace, accuracy, and quiet strength that had characterized the last 12 years of my life. There was nothing left to show now except that I was impenetrable, unstoppable, and free from the past. Meridian Consulting was more than just a business. It was a message, a stronghold, and a legacy made from strength, stillness, and determination. And if anyone thought they could figure it out, they were wrong. There was a peculiar sense of satisfaction at the end of the week. Every question was answered, every possible weakness was closed, and every team member was on the same page and alert. And I knew that the main fight, the one that would change everything, was still to come. But I also knew this: I wasn't waiting for it to happen for the first time. I was ready to face it on my own terms, and I would do so with clarity, accuracy, and strength. Heather Evans, who used to be invisible, is now completely visible and very scary. And this time, no one would ever think less of me again. The next few days blended into a perfectly planned routine. Every morning started with checking and evaluating, and every night finished with simulations of what may go wrong. Meridian Consulting had turned into a fortress, yet even the strongest walls might be tested. And I knew that someone had the time to find a crack. It began slowly. A delivery person dropped off a package in the lobby of our office. It had no markings or a return address. Security stopped me from opening it, so I did it under supervision. Inside came a plain envelope with just one picture, a photo of my apartment taken from a strange angle that made it look like someone was watching. There was no note or explanation, only the clear message, "We're watching." At first, I was shocked, then angry, and then I focused on the task at hand. The person who did this wasn't careless. They were skillful, careful, and patient. They had spent time, money, and other resources to send me a message directly. And I, Heather Evans, was not someone who panicked. Daniel and I looked at the security tape, but the courier's arrival was ghostly. There was no face, no identifying marks, and merely a shadow in the corner of the camera. Elias, our security specialist, shook his head. He said, "This isn't random. This is on purpose. It's a conflict of the mind. Someone is trying to make you uneasy and keep you busy." I nodded and put the envelope in the evidence box. Good. That's all they'll get. There was no sign of life, no response, nothing. Claire Donovan got in touch again the next day. This time, her tone was urgent. "It's become worse, Heather. Whoever is doing this isn't just looking into your business, they're looking into you. Your home, the places you go, and even the people you know. You need to be careful." I met her in a safe place close to the waterfront. She was calm and professional, but the creases around her eyes made it look like she had seen too many people fall for threats like these. "They've been patient," she remarked. "They've been waiting for you to calm down and feel safe. And now they're seeing how you react. They are keeping track of your habits, patterns, and connections. They will try to scare you if they think they can. But you can change the game. How? I asked, already thinking of options in my head. Information, Claire said. Controlled leaks, false leads, and surveillance in reverse. You make people chase things that aren't there, and we make reality stronger. And you have to be unpredictable. Don't stick to your usual schedule, change locations, and mix up your routines. They shouldn't expect anything. That night, I sat in my new apartment, looking out over the city lights. The terror I had formerly known as adrenaline became into strategy. Everything I had done in my life, the long nights, the planned risks, and the cautious protection of my freedom, had prepared me for this. Meridian's operations kept going with merciless efficiency throughout the next week. I followed Claire's advice and added random departures, encrypted communications, fake files, and staggered timetables. I even employed temporary workers to make fake digital footprints that suggested alternate office locations and ownership arrangements. But even with these steps, the stress never went away. Every phone call, every shadow that passed my window, and every email that came in out of the blue made me suspicious. But throughout the years, I learned an important lesson: fear only has power if you allow it tell you what to do. And I wasn't going to let it. Daniel came into my office one night, and his face was unusually tight. He handed a tablet over the desk and said, "Heather, you need to look at this." I tapped the screen. There it was, an article from a European financial news site that was subtle in its wording but clear in its meaning. It cited Meridian Consulting and hinted at a possible conflict of interest with a shady investor, who was me, even though my name wasn't revealed. The report was weak and based on speculation, but it was meant to make clients and partners doubt. Daniel said, "They're testing reactions. They want you to freak out and make a mistake." I leaned back. Or they're showing themselves. Let them. Every falsehood they tell shows how desperate they are. Fear doesn't make us do anything. We act on what we know. The next step up came out of nowhere. An anonymous person sent a meeting request, but the time and place were not given. The message was clear: if you want to know the truth about your father's legacy, come by yourself. I knew this could be a trap, yet I couldn't help but want to go. I had always wanted to know my father better, not as the distant figure who ran our household, but as a man whose actions had affected my life in ways that left wounds and shadows. Claire insisted on coming with me and insisted on a strategic monitoring plan. But I said no. This was personal, and certain fights needed personal bravery. The meeting venue was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outside of town that smelled of rust, oil, and secrets. I got there early and looked around every shadow and corner. The warehouse was quiet and heavy. The air had a subtle metallic smell of excitement. Then a man in his mid-40s stepped out of the shadows. He was dressed perfectly, even though the area was not. He said his name was Victor and that he was a middleman. He said he knew things about my father's business and the secret network of power that had shaped both Meridian and Ivan's logistics. Victor stated in a calm, steady voice, "You wanted to know the truth about your father. But be careful, the truth comes at a price." I listened and took in every word and suggestion of meaning. Victor talked about investments that were hidden, contracts that weren't registered, and relationships that were made in secret. He portrayed a picture of a world where power was money and the past never really went away. It stayed there, altering destinies in silent, untraceable ways. When I left the warehouse hours later, I knew two things for sure. First, my father's legacy was much more complicated and dangerous than I had thought. Second, the threats I had been getting were not random. They were a continuation of that tradition, a shadow that reached across time to test my strength, my judgment, and my bravery. When I got back to my flat, I looked out over the city, and the weight of what I had learned settled on me like concrete. But in the middle of all the confusion, a spark lit up. Every piece of information, every threat, and every quiet warning had simply made my instincts stronger and my will stronger. I wouldn't be scared. I would not be forced. And I wouldn't let the past, no matter how complicated or terrible, control my future. Heather Evans had learned the most important lesson: the only power that mattered was her own. And Meridian Consulting, her vision, her legacy, and her castle would last, not because of luck or inherited power, but because of her unbreakable, strategic, and unbreakable strength. And in the shadows, those who thought they could control, manipulate, or undo me were already learning the most terrifying lesson of all: Heather Evans could see them. And she was ready. The air in the morning felt heavy with finality. After weeks of secret threats, concealed monitoring, and slowly uncovering my father's secret heritage, one thing became clear: it was time to face the people who had been stalking me and trying to control my life from the shadows. Meridian Consulting had been strengthened both digitally and physically. The security precautions were perfect. Every system was encrypted, and only I could foresee what would happen next. Daniel and Claire had made plans for every possible situation, but I knew that this fight would need more than rationality. It would need bravery, instinct, and a clear sense of purpose. The lead came out of nowhere. Victor, the middleman who had originally told me about parts of my father's secret network, got in touch with me again and asked to meet in private at a place of his choice. His message was short and almost mocking: "The truth is right in front of you, will you take it?" I agreed, knowing that every move I made would be watched, studied, and understood. But I had learned a long time ago that fear is only a weapon when people are willing to give in to it. I would not give up. The gathering spot was an old villa on the cliffs above the port. Its construction was a skeleton of decay and grandeur. When I got there, the wind blew across the terrace and the smell of salt and stone filled the air. Victor was waiting, as calm as ever, yet the slight shaking of his hands showed that he was tense. He responded, "You've done a good job of getting ready. I can see why your foes are careful. And yet you sent me here alone," I said as I stepped inside the dark room. "Be honest with me, Victor. Don't play games." He nodded and pointed to a table in the middle of the main area. There were papers, pictures, and digital drives on it, proof of deals, secret contracts, and alliances made in secret. It was a map of power, influence, and danger that crossed countries and decades. Victor remarked, "These are the threads of your father's network." He was more than just a businessman, he was a strategist, a master of influence, and a guy who built empires from the ground up. And now, those shadows are looking at you. I reviewed the materials, and each one opened my eyes. My father's choices, which had formerly seemed random and far away, now made sense. They were linked to the threats I had experienced, the attempts to destabilize Meridian, and Ivan's logistic sneaky moves. "Why me?" I asked. "Why now?" Victor said, "Because he believed in being ready." He often stated, "A successor is not measured by comfort, but by fire." Heather, you have been tested. And now the last test is coming up. The last test. As I thought about what Victor had said, the words kept coming back to me. The threats, the spying, and the false stories were all meant to make me make errors, lose confidence, and see if I could rise above the shadows of dread and legacy. I left the villa with a new understanding: the enemy wasn't just one individual, it was a system, a network, and a heritage of power that needed to be dealt with. And I would meet it with clarity, accuracy, and strength. In Meridian's war room, I called a meeting of Daniel, Claire, and a couple of my most trusted team members to come up with a plan. The digital screens showed the network that Victor had revealed, with nodes of power reaching across businesses, governments, and secret investors. I said, this network thrives on fear and secrecy. They rely on the idea that people are weak. But we are not weak. We are careful. We turn every move they make into something else. We control every weakness they take advantage of. The shadows that follow us will be revealed, and their tricks will fall apart when people look closely. We spent hours breaking down the network, following every link, resource, and possible point of leverage. The challenge was huge, yet every new piece of information made me feel more in control. I now understood that knowledge was not only power, but also freedom. The first step in neutralizing the dangers was to hit them with accurate attacks. Digital spying was turned around, fake money trails were set up, and planned disclosures were put in forums where murmurs would get to the proper people. Contacts that the opponent had earlier used were carefully redirected, and their sense of control was carefully managed. At the same time, Daniel and I worked together to protect Meridian's assets so that no outside forces could threaten the company's stability. Every move was planned, and every answer was thought out. Then came the personal confrontation, the last chance to deal with the individual who had been making threats from the shadows. The individual who delivered the picture, spread the stories, and set up the secret meetings. They didn't think I was capable. They thought I would be scared, unsure, and hesitant. I faced them in a neutral place, a safe, monitored site that was picked to keep things from getting out of hand. They came in with confidence, expecting everybody to do what they said and give in. But they just discovered strength. I answered, calm and steady, you overestimated your power. You thought that the past would rule me and that I would give in to pressure. But you overlooked one important thing, I am not a victim of my father's legacy, I am the heir to it. And I decide how the legacy affects the present, not you. We talked for hours, going over motives and showing proof. Every trick they used to scare me backfired, showing their weaknesses, contradictions, and threats of legal and financial trouble. In the end, the fight didn't end in violence, but in understanding. They were trapped, not physically, but tactically, legally, and socially. All of the levers that could be used to control things have been turned off. Every shadow they made was lit up. I had a deep sense of freedom when I got back to Meridian's headquarters. The threats that had been following me were gone, not because they were weak, but because I had used my power more effectively. Finally, the network of influence that had troubled my family for decades was accounted for, contained, and, when necessary, taken apart. That night, I stood in my apartment looking out over the city. The lights flickered like a galaxy of victory. I thought about the journey, the betrayals, the new information, the terror, and the strength. I had become stronger with each test, struggle, and shadow I confronted. Heather Evans had not only survived, but changed. Meridian Consulting did well under her direction. Her vision was clear, and no one questioned her strategy. It was possible to face and use the past, even though it was complicated and dangerous. And deep down, a quiet truth rang true, power is not given, inherited, or seized, it is claimed, used, and protected. I had said it. I had worked it out. And I would protect it from any shadow that dared to cross my way. The last chapter was not the end, it was the start. A start when every choice was made on purpose, every move was planned, and every shadow was taken into account. Heather Evans didn't see the heritage as a burden, she saw it as a light. And the world, with all of its problems and dangers, had learned a simple, obvious truth: she could not be controlled, scared, or broken. She was the architect of her future, the leader of her heritage, and the unbreakable force in a world based on shadows. As the night wore on and the city below buzzed, I let myself have a rare moment of serenity. The threats had been dealt with, the problems solved, and the future was wide open and ready. For the first time in years, I felt truly empowered. I understood that the past could teach me lessons instead of making me afraid, that shadows could help me plan, and that the most powerful thing was to be clear, determined, and have a strong sense of purpose. People no longer muttered Heather Evans's name in doubt or fear. She was there, strong and obvious. And in the metropolis of shadows and light, power and influence, she stood strong, unbroken, and free. The end of the story was not anarchy, but mastery. And in that mastery was the ultimate truth: the legacy we leave behind is only as strong as the guts, wisdom, and commitment we put into it. Heather had brought all three, and by doing so, she had turned every threat, shadow, and obstacle into the clear brightness of her own victory.